The giant alien queen laughed at the idea of reproducing with a human, until she became pregnant. The throne room was alive with laughter, crystalline pillars vibrating as though the queen's amusement alone could shake the empire. Her voice cut through the vast chamber like liquid light, rich with mockery, sharp as a blade. She lounged across her transparent throne, as if gravity itself bowed to her. The court below stiffened, uneasy at her words, but too afraid to speak. Her declaration had been cruelly simple, that the idea of lowering herself to the touch of a human was so absurd it deserved only ridicule. The laughter rolled again, and her council exchanged silent glances, knowing punishment was inevitable. Pride in their ruler had turned to dread. For arrogance, this unchecked always invited consequences. Her punishment was exile, wrapped not in fire and iron but in humiliation. The council decreed she would live among humans, wear their clothes, breathe their heavy atmosphere, stumble through their culture of socks and sarcasm, and learn humility in the one place where her beauty, power, and crystal-born grace meant nothing. Stripped of her crown, cloaked in flesh that dulled her glow, she was sent to earth. Only her ears remained untouched, long and delicate, a reminder of the alien blood she could never truly disguise. She landed in the middle of a city that smelled of oil and rain. The first thing she noticed was the noise, endless, chaotic, unrefined. Engines roared, voices clashed, someone shouted about hot dogs. She stood in the center of the sidewalk, elegant and otherworldly in her borrowed human form, while an old man pushed past her muttering something about cosplay. She blinked. This was her exile? The grand punishment of the universe was crosswalks and advertisements? The queen, once worshipped across constellations, found herself trapped in a tiny rented apartment above a laundromat. The walls were thin, and at night she was serenaded not by choirs of crystal, but by a neighbor attempting karaoke with more bravery than talent. Her first attempt to use the human contraption called a microwave ended in smoke, sparks, and a suspicious smell that clung to the air for days. She had once commanded fleets, now she wrestled with takeout menus. Her arrogance refused to die quietly. She attempted to assert her authority in the most human of settings, the grocery store. When the cashier asked if she wanted paper or plastic, she stared him down and declared, "I will take what is worthy of a queen." The teenager simply handed her both, rolled his eyes, and called for the next customer. The sting of his indifference cut deeper than any blade. Days stretched into weeks. She mocked humanity in private, sneering at their clumsy inventions, their inefficient systems, their absurd obsession with reality television. Yet small cracks began to appear in her disdain. She caught herself laughing, actually laughing, at the neighbor's failed karaoke rendition of Total Eclipse of the Heart. She found herself staring too long at the chaotic colors of sunsets, which seemed more honest than the flawless glow of her empire's crystal skies. And she discovered, to her horror, that she liked pizza. Not respected it, not tolerated it, liked it. The greasy, sloppy, inexplicably satisfying creation was beneath her station, and yet she devoured it with the shameful hunger of someone who had finally tasted rebellion. Her ears were the only thing she could not hide. Children pointed, curious, and asked if she was an elf. At first she dismissed them with cold glares, but eventually, when pressed by one particularly persistent child, she muttered, "Yes, a very important elf. Kneel." The child laughed and offered her half a lollipop, sticky and red. She took it, against her better judgment, and found herself oddly moved by the gesture. Her exile was supposed to break her spirit, yet it left her in a state of restless amusement. She was humiliated, yes, but in ways so absurd they became almost entertaining. She could not decide whether Earth was the cruelest punishment or the strangest gift. At night, she lay awake in her small, creaking bed, staring at the ceiling as the sounds of the city drifted up to her window. Sirens, laughter. The hum of life lived without ceremony. For the first time in centuries, she did not know what tomorrow would bring. Still, she held onto one truth. Humans were fragile, ridiculous creatures. They tripped over their own feet, spilled drinks on themselves, and obsessed over cats on glowing screens. The thought of intimacy with one of them remained beneath her, something she scoffed at whenever the idea crossed her mind. Yet when she caught her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror, long ears framing a face no longer lit by crystal light, she felt the faintest flicker of unease. Somewhere in the laughter and the chaos, in the lollipops and the karaoke, Earth had begun to change her. And that, she thought bitterly as she slammed the microwave shut for a second attempt, was the real punishment. Her exile turned more complicated the day she met the human man. She had expected enemies, perhaps spies sent by her council to monitor her humiliation, but not a mechanic whose hands were permanently stained with grease, and whose humor appeared to run entirely on bad puns. Their meeting was neither majestic nor fated by the stars. It was loud, awkward, and smelled faintly of engine oil. She had stormed into the workshop after a borrowed human contraption, a car, had decided to stop working. To her, it was a primitive device, a rolling box of metal and fumes. She demanded it fix itself, which it stubbornly refused to do. Forced into indignity, she marched it to the nearest garage and declared herself its conqueror. The man looked up from under the hood of another vehicle and simply said, "You parked it backwards." Impressive. Most people use the driveway. His tone was dry, his grin infuriating. She responded with a glare that once silenced armies. He handed her a wrench and asked her to hold the flashlight. She had never held a wrench in her life. The weight of it was absurd, heavy and oily, so different from the crystalline tools of her empire. She held it as one might hold a venomous creature, and when he glanced at her and said, "Careful, it bites," she nearly threw it at his head. The hours stretched with unfamiliar rhythm. He worked, humming a strange tune about highways and broken hearts, while she tried not to suffocate on the thick smell of oil and humanity. She demanded explanations for everything. Why the engine hissed, why humans built cars that broke so easily, why the walls were covered with calendars of women posing next to motorcycles. His answers were maddeningly casual. Engines overheat, machines get tired, and the calendars are for motivation. Motivation for what? She snapped. To keep working until payday. She stared at him as though he had confessed to worshipping bananas. By the time the car sputtered back to life, she had resolved to erase him from her mind. But he waved at her departure with the same lazy grin, shouting, "Try not to park it upside down next time, princess." She froze. Princess. The word, once sacred, now thrown like a casual nickname, lingered in her ears. She considered vaporizing him on the spot, if only she still had the power. Instead, she drove off with dignity, which lasted precisely 2 blocks before the car stalled again. Their encounters became frequent, each one a battle she never won. Every time the car faltered, she returned to his garage, and every time he met her scorn with jokes. He called her Elf Queen when her ears peeked through her hair, Starlight when she muttered about galaxies, and Your Majesty whenever she tried to command him. She pretended to despise it, but somewhere beneath the fury, she caught herself hiding a smile. Humor wrapped around her like an unwanted cloak. She was accustomed to fear, reverence, obedience. But this man treated her as though she were ordinary, a customer with too much pride and not enough patience. The absurdity of it gnawed at her. When she insulted his intelligence, he countered with jokes about her inability to operate a toaster. When she boasted of her strength, he reminded her she couldn't open a jar of pickles without asking for help. One evening, after yet another breakdown, she found herself in his workshop long after the repairs were finished. He poured her a drink, not of glowing crystal nectar, but of something brown and fizzy that made her nose tingle. They sat in silence, interrupted only by his occasional commentary on the absurdity of human life. He confessed his fear of bills, his hatred of taxes, his obsession with an old science fiction show where humans wore rubber alien masks. She listened, pretending to be unimpressed, though his honesty left her strangely unsteady. "Why do you stay here?" she asked at last. "This world is chaotic, inefficient, broken." He shrugged. "Because it's mine, and because someone has to keep fixing it, even if it keeps breaking." The simplicity of the answer unsettled her more than any council decree. She had mocked humans for their fragility, but here was a man who knew his world was imperfect and still chose to fight for it, armed only with wrenches and stubbornness. She told herself she was only studying him, a specimen of human resilience. She told herself his jokes irritated her, not amused her. She told herself the warmth she felt when he handed her a soda bottle and said, "Don't shake it, Your Majesty," was nothing more than chemical reaction. But when she left that night, the stars above Earth seemed different. Smaller, yes, but closer somehow, as though they leaned down to listen. She stood in the street, long ears catching the city's hum, and for the first time she wondered if her punishment was not meant to humble her, but to change her. She hated the thought. She also hated the fact that she was already planning an excuse to see the mechanic again. It began, as so many disasters did, with a dare. She had no idea how the human had managed to twist the evening into a challenge, but one moment they were arguing about the absurdity of Earth beverages. How could anyone drink something called root beer when no roots were involved? And the next he was leaning across the table, grin wide, and saying, "You're too scared." Her ears twitched. No one in her empire had ever dared accuse her of fear. Generals had trembled at her silence. Ambassadors had fainted at her stare. But this man sat there in a grease-stained shirt, sipping soda through a straw, and said the words like a joke. She should have walked away. Instead, she stayed. The dare was ridiculous, of course. To share one night together, to prove that her scorn was genuine and her laughter at the very idea of intimacy with a human was not just the defense of pride. He offered it with the casual bravado of someone who never expected her to agree. So naturally, she did. The moment itself was not majestic. There were no choirs of crystal, no celestial symphonies. The bed creaked, the neighbors' karaoke bled through the walls, off-key, singing about love as if the universe were mocking her, and the human made jokes at entirely the wrong times. She swore at him in 3 alien dialects. He only laughed harder. Somehow, through the irritation and the absurdity, she found herself tangled in something she could not explain. Morning was worse. Silence filled the small room, heavier than the blankets. She, who had once commanded galaxies, could not bring herself to look at him. He stretched, yawned, and asked if she wanted pancakes. Pancakes! She nearly hurled the pillow at his head. But when she left, ears hidden beneath a hood, she felt an unfamiliar weight in her chest. Days passed, and the weight grew stranger. It was not guilt. She had never regretted anything in her immortal life. It was not weakness, though she woke at night feeling fragile in ways she could not define. Then, one morning, standing in the cramped bathroom with the mirror cracked at the corner, she realized. A presence stirred inside her. Not entirely alien, not entirely human. A pulse where no pulse should be. Fear struck like lightning. Her people would call it corruption, a dilution of the pure crystalline bloodline. They would strip her of her name, erase the record of her rule, cast her into obscurity. Worse, the council might come for the child. The thought nearly crushed her. She clutched the sink, staring at her own reflection, ears quivering. She had mocked the very idea, and now she went to him, not with dignity, not with command, but trembling in a way she hated. He was in the workshop, covered in oil, humming again. She marched up, grabbed his shirt, and whispered, "What have you done to me?" He blinked. "Fixed your carburetor?" Her grip tightened. "Not the machine. Me." He tilted his head, eyes narrowing, then widening. She braced for mockery, for fear, for rejection. Instead, he muttered something about prenatal vitamins and fainted. The crash of tools scattered across the floor jolted her, from terror into fury. She kicked his foot until he woke, groaning. "You fainted," she said, voice dripping with contempt. "Humans faint sometimes," he muttered, rubbing his head. "Big news." "So, you're saying we're having—" She cut him off with a glare so sharp it could have sliced through steel. "Say it aloud and I will end you." But the truth hung between them, undeniable. He laughed, actually laughed, until she nearly smacked him with a wrench. "This is the part where you panic," she snapped. "Oh, I'm panicking," he said, still grinning. "Just give me a minute to enjoy the fact that I'm going to be the first guy in history to need both diapers and interstellar travel insurance." Her fury faltered, replaced by confusion. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't angry. He was excited. Somehow, impossibly, he wanted this. The days that followed were chaos. She tried to conceal the truth from her people, intercepting the occasional crystalline transmission with increasingly creative excuses. Yes, I am adjusting to human society. No, the grease on my hands is not symbolic. Yes, I am learning humility. No, you may not visit. Meanwhile, the human insisted on preparing for the future. He bought books, most of which made her want to burn the planet. He asked if alien children needed booster seats. He decorated one corner of the apartment with toys shaped like bears. Her ears twitched with every absurdity, but beneath the irritation, she felt something else. When he sat beside her, quietly resting his hand on hers, when he spoke not of thrones or punishment but of family, she realized her exile had become more than humiliation. It had become choice. And that was the most terrifying discovery of all. Life became a balancing act between secrets, cravings, and disasters. She had once juggled interstellar diplomacy with a flick of her hand, commanded fleets with a single word, yet now she found herself hiding morning sickness from her neighbors and disguising her ears beneath hats that made her look like a tourist from a country no one had heard of. The mechanic, her mechanic, seemed to thrive on the chaos. He showed up with grocery bags filled with strange combinations of food, explaining that pregnant people sometimes craved unusual things. She had demanded starfruit soaked in plasma nectar, and when he couldn't find it, he returned with pickles dipped in ice cream. She nearly threw the bowl at his head but stopped after tasting it. It wasn't terrible. Her body changed in ways she refused to acknowledge out loud. She muttered excuses into the crystalline communicator when her counsel called, claiming she was adapting to Earth's heavy atmosphere whenever her voice wavered. The council pressed, suspicious, demanding reports of humiliation, but she deflected with sarcasm. Yes, I scrub floors. Yes, humans insult me daily. Yes, I am learning to survive in poverty. Are you entertained? It bought her time, though every transmission left her with ears twitching and nerves frayed. Meanwhile, the mechanic insisted they prepare like humans. He dragged her to an Earth store called Baby Depot, a warehouse of tiny clothes and contraptions. She marched through the aisles with the posture of a queen, while he argued over strollers as though choosing a starship. When a clerk asked if they needed help, she declared, "Bring me your finest hover cradle." The blank stare she received made her want to burn the building down. Instead, she stormed out with a stuffed bear under one arm. Humor clung to every disaster. She once attempted to disguise her ears with a knitted beanie, but when she met the mechanic's friends, one of them asked if she was starting a new hipster band. Another time, her attempt to cook resulted in a smoking oven and an explosion that triggered the fire alarm. The human firemen arrived, one of them remarking, "Nice ears." She told him she was from Finland. He nodded as if that explained everything. But beneath the comedy, unease grew. The mechanic remained steadfast, reassuring, filling the air with bad jokes about raising a half-alien child. Yet her instincts whispered danger. She woke at night to phantom vibrations, the subtle hum of crystalline frequencies. She knew her people were watching. Sooner or later, the council would discover the truth, and when they did, they would not simply scold her. They would come. One evening, as she sat by the window with city lights flickering below, he asked the question she had been avoiding. What happens if your people find out? She didn't answer immediately. She wanted to tell him they would laugh, that it was harmless. But the truth pressed against her ribs. They would see the child as a threat. They would see him as disposable. She whispered, "They will come." He didn't flinch. He only leaned back, laced his fingers behind his head, and said, "Good. I've been meaning to show off my wrench collection." Her ears twitched. You cannot fight an interstellar council with tools designed to fix tractors. "You'd be surprised," he said, grin unshaken. It was absurd. It was infuriating. It was also strangely comforting. For centuries, she had relied on fear to shield her. Now she had someone who relied on stubborn humor and grease-stained hands. She hated how much safer that made her feel. The days grew stranger. She found herself laughing more, scolding less. She learned to drink earth tea, though she still called it leaf soup. She practiced sarcasm with the mechanic's friends, who treated her long ears as though they were merely an eccentric fashion choice. She still carried her fear like a shadow, but it no longer consumed her every moment. Then came the signal, a crystalline pulse, faint but unmistakable, humming through the air like the memory of a song she had once sung. Her council had noticed the silence between her reports. They were coming to verify her penance. Her exile was about to end, not in quiet failure, but in confrontation. The mechanic found her staring out the window again, ears rigid, eyes sharp. He asked what was wrong, and she told him the truth this time. She told him about the council, the judgment, the risk. She expected him to panic, to finally retreat from the madness. Instead, he fetched 2 mugs of tea, sat beside her, and said, "Then we'll tell them to shove it." She almost laughed, almost cried. Instead, she sipped the leaf soup and muttered, "You are a ridiculous human." "Yeah," he said, clinking his mug against hers, "but I'm your ridiculous human." The signal grew stronger. Soon, the sky would split, and her worlds would collide. The sky tore open in silence, a seam of light stretching above the city. She felt it before she saw it, the crystalline pulse of her people resonating against her bones. The council had arrived. Their ships shimmered like shards of glass, suspended in the atmosphere, casting prismatic shadows across the streets. Humans pointed upward, recording with their devices, unaware that the spectacle was meant for her. She stood at the window, long ears trembling, while the mechanic tightened his grip on the wrench he insisted was a weapon. She wanted to laugh at him, and maybe cry, but mostly she wanted to drag him far away before the council descended. He wouldn't leave. He never left. The summons came through the air, her name vibrating across every frequency at once. She answered, though her voice wavered. "I am here." The crystalline chorus responded, "You are accused of corruption. You will surrender and return." She descended to the street where the council had chosen to appear, their form shimmering, taller than any human, their presence bending the light itself. Citizens gasped, stumbled, whispered about angels or invaders. The council ignored them all, their eyes fixed only on her, and on the man standing stubbornly at her side. "You mock us further by consorting with him in public," the eldest intoned. "You have stained the line. Step forward alone." She should have obeyed. The part of her raised in crystalline halls, shaped by power and pride, urged surrender. But another part, the part that had eaten pickles with ice cream, sung off-key with neighbors, and laughed at the mechanic's terrible jokes, refused. She stepped forward, yes, but only to block their view of him. Her voice shook but did not falter. "I mocked humanity once. I called them fragile, clumsy, laughable. I was wrong. They are all those things, but they are also resilient, absurdly hopeful, and infuriatingly brave. I will not surrender. Not him, not the child." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The council stiffened, their lights sharpening like blades. One lifted a hand, ready to strike, but the mechanic shouted before she could stop him. "Hey, you lot ever heard of child support? Because from where I'm standing, you owe us big time." The words, ridiculous and human, cracked the air. Some of the council faltered. Laughter was foreign to them, yet the mechanic's absurd defiance struck something unexpected. A younger counselor lowered her hand, whispering, "Perhaps exile was never punishment. Perhaps it was revelation." The eldest scowled, but the chorus fractured. Debate rose among them, voices overlapping like shattered crystal. She stood her ground, clutching her defiance like a blade, until at last the light dimmed. The verdict came. She would not be queen again, but neither would she be condemned. Her name would remain, marked with scandal, but her child would live. The ships withdrew, light sealing itself back into the sky. Humans cheered as though fireworks had ended, blissfully unaware of the near war that had just passed over their heads. She collapsed into laughter, relief pouring out in waves. The mechanic offered his wrench, like a knight presenting a sword. "Told you it had come in handy." She snatched it from him, smacked his arm with the flat side, and whispered, "You are impossible." Weeks turned to months. Her belly grew, and with it, her acceptance of a life she had once mocked. She learned to sit through human sitcoms without scoffing at the canned laughter. She joined her neighbor's karaoke night and, to her own shock, enjoyed it. She still demanded dignity, still snapped when irritated, but her edges had softened. The mechanic remained himself, stubborn, greasy, full of terrible puns, but she no longer found his jokes infuriating. They were anchor and comfort, absurdity wrapped in love. One evening, as they prepared a nursery with shelves already collapsing under the weight of stuffed animals, he asked if she missed her throne. She paused, ears twitching, and then shook her head. The throne was cold. "This is warm." When the child came, half human, half crystalline, the neighbors gathered with casseroles and curiosity. She held the small life against her chest, trembling not with fear, but with wonder. She had ruled empires, commanded armies, and none of it compared to the fragile weight in her arms. Her punishment had been exile. Instead, it became her salvation. She had found humility, laughter, and a love she had once scorned. She had lost her throne, but she had gained something far greater. As she sat with the mechanic at her side, their child between them, she whispered words she never thought she'd speak. "I mocked the thought of this once. Now I cannot imagine life without it." He smirked, leaned back, and said, "Told you I was worth keeping around. Also, dibs on teaching the kid how to drive." She groaned, but she was smiling, and for the first time in her long, proud life, the queen was content. The end.